Hi there, Remedial Rewatch fans. It's me, Tyler McCarthy, here with another great episode, a very special episode of our Remedial Rewatch, the podcast where we are going through every episode of Community. But for this one, we're kind of at the halfway point. And because we are an offshoot of the Media Lit podcast, we decided, let's get academic with it. Let's do a little research paper about where Community has taken us so far. The behind-the-scenes drama that plagued the time between seasons 3 and seasons 4. And I'm really excited to run a couple of my first-time friends here through this drama. So without further ado, let me please introduce my good friends, the founders of the Media Lit podcast, just all-around handsome men. We have Randy Lane and Kris Ingersoll. Hi, guys. Let's start with Randy. I should have done you one at a time so that you could properly say hello.
No, that's okay, Tyler. I don't know if you know this, but I am perpetually chasing the crown of world's sexiest podcasters. I don't think the Kelseys deserve it. I think I should go to Media Lit or perhaps Remedial Rewatch with that sharp new look you've got going, Tyler.
Thank you.
Seriously, that beard is dangerous. Dangerous.
That's what I say. I'm going to have to register it soon. That's absolutely true. Kris, how are you? I'm so excited for you in particular because for those of you who are just tuning into this episode, first of all, hi. Second of all, why? Third of all, Kris is the one he's watching Community for the first time. So everything he has to say is incredibly interesting to me and should be incredibly interesting to you, the listener. But how excited are you to get into this research paper episode?
Thrilled to take a minute to pause and catch up on all of the things we've experienced together so far. I think that's been the joy of the show, is sharing it with you guys, right? Sharing it in community. It's been the building laughs and stuff. So I'm psyched to be able to recap it all and dig into some of the drama too and become a little bit more initiated. I'm ready to have some of the innocence taken from me and understand more about the goings on behind the scenes.
Yes. And look, for better or worse, that's going to be a lot of this episode. Randy, I'm curious about you as well. Kris is going into this blind. What's your familiarity with this time in Community's history?
Yeah, I think I actually have a lot to learn from you tonight as well, because as we know, I came to this as a COVID watch. I was not in the thick of it as the drama was going down. I've certainly read things over the years. I know during that first rewatch, as I started to tell that there was something strange going on with the Pierce Hawthorne character, I do think I did some light research. I started to pick up on things. In more recent years, the algorithm loves to feed me clips of Joel McHale being asked tirelessly about Chevy Chase, as he probably will be for the rest of his life. I've been tuned into it more and more over time. I'm ready to hear a much more coherent, in the flow of the show version of things from you, Tyler.
Oh, I've never been accused of being coherent. That's so exciting. This is great.
Look out. Things are changing.
Yeah, no, I'm not the best at giving reports. Not my words. High school teacher.
Those high school teachers don't know shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's why we brought you all here. So before we get into all the drama, all the research, all of that stuff, let's take a second and just talk about Community and our experience so far, because guys, we're at the halfway point with Community. We're at the end. We finished season 3. We've got seasons 4, 5, and 6 to go. They are some of the most storied and odd seasons, particularly season 4 that we're going into for reasons we'll get into. But let's just talk about your experience with the show so far. I think we all can kind of agree that there is a unique quality to this show, which made it so important for us to do Community this way instead of just a typical Media Lit podcast where we take a couple episodes or something like that. We decided to do a full series. And I'll start with Kris. What's been your experience so far? What are your thoughts on just sort of the specialness of Community, if there is one to you? What are you thinking?
Well, I hope it's a theme. If folks have been listening along with us, their ability to be something so surreal, so over the top, you can almost believe that it's intentionally otherworldly in terms of the stories and the character choices being put on display. And then yet so deeply familiar and human and sincere and full of the life that we all live, right? In our small moments and in our big moments. These friends have built a family. And they went from study pals to like a real family in just these 3 seasons. I'm almost like a little trepidatious to move forward. I'm afraid for change. I have come to love spending time with these folks. Like, I think we all experience this, right? When you're binge watching a show and it's like, hey, I want to go hang out with those pals that I like spending time with.
Yes.
Now, I mean, I think it really isn't that magical balance between the absurd. How many Dean puns can we do? And then still the deep connection between the Dean and the study group, right? As an example. So I've been loving the show and the experience so far.
Will we try to get to the bottom of that question, Kris? Indeed, we will.
Nice.
We're going to do an episode where we all just have our best Dean puns. We'll do an entire episode where every sentence is a Dean pun. See if our listeners don't walk into the ocean. Randy, similar question, same question. Like, how has this rewatch of Community been for you? Like, what are your thoughts on Community thus far?
Yeah, there's that warmth, there's that comfort, there's that group of found friends that Kris spoke to. But I think where my mind went with this question is just rewatching this for a podcast. I'm just watching this creative magic unfold before me. There aren't a lot of things that you can watch and rewatch and feel like this is a show that's redefining something about popular culture as we know it. Honestly, the only other example that comes to mind for me in my lifetime is going back and watching Freaks and Geeks, which I did watch in real time. Watching that show tell a type of story that the world wasn't ready for yet, and watching it, struggle and be canceled. But then just unleashing those creatives on Hollywood, and they're still sticking around. Those that have not disappeared into shame are still sticking around and gracing our television screens. Yeah,
even the ones filled with shame are making their comeback.
Well, no one ever really gets pushed out, do they?
No. That's a great example, Freaks and Geeks. And I love the way you phrased like a show the world wasn't ready for. That's very much how I felt about Community, or at the very least, the world was becoming ready for it. Like Freaks and Geeks got canceled after one season because people weren't ready for it. Community, it was more like a very vocal fan base was like, we are ready for this, keep it going. So it was so strange to like be on the cusp of that in real time. And like seasons 1 through 3, it was just so easy to stand at the vanguard of that fandom and like defend it. Like, this is worth it. And now as we get into sort of like this more murkier area, it becomes a little more complicated to do that, to join this fandom and things like that. And it's, for better or worse, I think a very interesting story. I love that you compared it to Freaks and Geeks. Are there any other shows that you think you can compare Community to? Because when I reach for good shows like Friends, for example, I'm not knocking Friends, but Community has something that Friends just doesn't, that other sitcoms that I love just don't. And we're going to talk about some theories as to why that is. But any other shows that jump to mind? I think Freaks and Geeks is a great example that just have that special sauce.
So in many ways, like, no. So in some very basic, superficial ways, I do think of past shows like Randy highlighted that have also come out and done some bold things and found an audience and then been canceled and brought back. Like, you think of Family Guy, you think of The Office and the fight that it had to find its legitimacy and its footing. But I don't know that those feel, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I don't know if those feel like Community to me. I don't think the experience of watching them is anything similar. I find thus far, this is a wholly unique experience for me as a show. The closest I can come to truly comparing the adventurous nature of this show. Like, I think that's part of what's so special for me is you can't get sick of it. It's not formulaic.
Yes.
There's no one way they do a Community episode. And I guess like Batman Brave and the Bold, the animated series, is so varied, and it's the different genres it wants to play in. Sometimes you get a Batman Western. Sometimes you get a Batman in space. Sometimes you get a Batman paired with Aquaman, and it's an ocean adventure. And it can feel different, even if some of the story beats are perhaps formulaic. Like, that is the magic of Community sometimes, is like, I can't imagine in real time, if I was watching this show live and I just didn't know what the next week's episode could possibly hold. Is it going to be a Murder, She Wrote homage? Perhaps.
Mhm.
It could be really, really good. And that's special. So I don't know. There's not a lot to compare it to for me.
Exactly. I 100% agree. I can hear like our most pedantic listener being like, well, all the shows they listed are multicam and Community is a single cam, and just sip a big tall glass of Hush. That's not what we're talking about.
That's what we're doing here.
Exactly. Like, we get it. But there is just, yeah, like, you're right. I think that hits the nail on the head. Is every episode is so unique, and you truly never know what you're going to get. But also, it's all canonical too. Like, they're not just throwing these things away. It's not just, Abed. If Abed were like Arrested Development, if Abed were to lose his hand in an episode, it's not just going to be back next episode.
Right. Yeah. Maybe Legends of Tomorrow is another example I can think of, like a family at the heart of it, like a core group of people that really anchor these absurd adventures.
Yes.
Listen, as we've often joked about on this podcast, I love to control an outline for a podcast episode. But today we are in the nurturing hands of one Tyler McCarthy. And Tyler, I love this outline you've built because you helped me make a connection I had never made before. But I was racking my brain like, is there a similar show? And I realized my favorite show of all time, while it is not a comedy or a sitcom, is the most similar to Community. And that is Northern Exposure. Have you ever seen this show, Tyler?
No, I'm not familiar.
So this is an early 90s show. I only ever watched it because I had a very cool English teacher once upon a time that showed us a couple of episodes in creative writing class. On the surface, it has a straightforward plot. You have a New York doctor, Dr. Joel Fleischman, and he has received a scholarship from the state of Alaska. But he had to agree to practice medicine in Alaska for 6 years because it is tough to get medical professionals. When he arrives to report to work, he gets shuttled off in like a bush plane off to like the most remote part of Alaska to this strange small town called Sicily. And as the show goes on, you learn that this is a town populated by lost souls. And some of these people are interesting, sort of like lost poets, free thinkers, just very different types of people. There's a woman named Ruth Ann who runs the general store. And they're just constantly breaking conventions, right? Like at one point, you find out she's like very disappointed in her son who became an investment banker because she wishes he could be more like the son who drives trucks and writes pastoral poems. There's an episode where everyone in town starts having one another's dreams. There's an episode where they find a body that's been encased in ice. There's an episode where they break the fourth wall. They do all sorts of zany, crazy stuff. It's in the service of thematic and dramatic storytelling, although there's plenty of humor. But yeah, there's one character where we have an ongoing arc where there's this legend that he fought a giant grizzly bear. They are mortal enemies. They will meet again someday. At one point, somebody finds the body of this bear, and he's just so heartbroken that his rival has been defeated. And I'm sorry that I'm going off on this diatribe about Northern Exposure. I'm upset.
I'm sorry. I'm not.
The reason I am is you have this New Yorker who thinks he's too good for this place, and he slowly, repeatedly has to be pushed toward connecting with the people in this town, in this community. And there's a lot of regression. But by the end of the series, he's gone native. It's partly because Rob Morrow got a little too big for his britches after Quiz Show and kind of screwed up the chemistry on set. It became a partial cast member. But yeah, so that is my partial answer to your question, but like 90% just trying to sell you on Northern Exposure. So there you go.
I love that. I'll watch that. I'm sorry. The reason I started laughing midway through was not because you were going on, but the idea of someone fighting a bear and that fight does not end in one of their deaths. Like, how does a fight with a bear end? The idea that they both went their separate ways, like, oh, round two will happen one day. How does...
It's been a while since I've watched the episode, but I think they end up like going over a ledge into a river and like...
Oh, okay. That's pretty badass.
To make his way back. I think the bear's name is Jesse or something. And like, this is just like how an episode starts. Like someone walks into the bar and Joel is there not knowing what's going on. They're just like, Holling, it's Jesse. He's dead. And like he just gets all serious. And then you as the audience learn with Joel that this is a grizzly bear.
I love
A
that.
legendary grizzly bear. Yeah, it's a kooky place on par with Greendale. Yeah, like at one point they hold their first election in like 20 years because it's like, oh yeah, Holling's the mayor. We don't need an election. Everything's good.
It's so hard, and I think some of the best. I think Freaks and Geeks did this. I think it sounds like Northern Exposure does this, and Community definitely does this, where you start out with like a grounded core cast, but the best shows very quickly become Springfield from The Simpsons, where it's just the town, the community, what have you, is where you can mine gold from. That's awesome. That's great. And I love that you sort of gave us this very loving book report about a different show, because now let's put on our gossipy bitches hats and let's talk a little bit about Pierce Hawthorne, Chevy Chase, this sort of elephant in the room that's been there for pretty much the entirety of the podcast is Chevy Chase, Pierce Hawthorne, how he fits in, how he doesn't. What are your thoughts just so far on the Pierce Hawthorne character? Randy, we'll take it right back to you.
You know, I think the first time through, it was an interesting thing to process, right? Because this was COVID and some time has passed since then. But enough time had passed even then that it felt like I was watching a show from a slightly different era already, a different part of my lifetime. Certainly we've spent a lot of time documenting some of the big swings they've taken on this show, some of the lines of appropriateness that they have flirted with at times, usually related to Pierce Hawthorne. And I think it started out as this sort of question of whether I was just judging this on the wrong timetable or if there was just a harsh reality that Chevy Chase isn't that funny that I was having to deal with on the show. You know, I loved him in all those classic films. But yeah, I think I just very much feel like I am watching someone who has washed up a bit past their prime. They are not willing to, you know, redirect themselves into the future, and they end up looking bad. Like if we unpack all the drama and I had all the details, I'm sure we could find some W's for Chevy where maybe there was something somewhere he was right about. But he's not allowing himself that grace. You know, another show I had listed for the last segment that I won't go on a full diatribe about is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I just remember watching an interview with Charlie Day at one point, and he was kind of talking about how they were initially frustrated after season 1 when they kind of felt like FX hoisted Danny DeVito on them. Like, oh, we have this thing, we made this great creative thing, but it's not good enough for you, right? You've got to give us Danny DeVito. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't know which DVD extra I watched this on. But essentially, he's like, so we had this moment, and then all of a sudden we had this realization, like, we're going to have Danny DeVito. If we can't make Danny DeVito funny, that is on us. And I love that they leaned into the assignment. And however you feel about It's Always Sunny, no one could deny that Danny DeVito leaned into that assignment.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
when I think of someone like adapting to a new period of time, a new style of comedy, I think of Danny DeVito adapting and Chevy just refusing to his own detriment and to the detriment of the show.
And DeVito doing it without ego too. Like that his character is a literal monster. And like he's so open to it. I think you're absolutely right. Kris, what have been your sort of takeaways from the whole Pierce Hawthorne, Chevy Chase experience on Community?
Well, to comment on Randy's take there, I think that was it right there at the end. Ego. He's so full of ego that there was just no world. I think everything you hear about him suggests that he's never been one who wants to change for anyone. He is who he is. He likes who he is. He's going to behave how he wants to behave and say what he wants to say. That's exhausting. And when it lacks the swagger and charm that he had once upon a time, it all of a sudden becomes nothing but abrasive, and it loses some of its potential for humor. I watch him amongst this cast, and I think about, like, you can see the lack of chemistry. You can see that nobody in that room is really charmed by him. So it's hard for Pierce Hawthorne to get away with anything. uh, he's funny to me sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I have laughed at Chevy in this show through these first 3 seasons.
Definitely.
There have been times where I've downright felt for Pierce, and I've enjoyed the performance. It's by no means all bad, but I'm on record from episode 1, like truly horrified sometimes by Pierce Hawthorne. There are times where he feels like gratuitous. It was so malicious, like mean for meanness sake. And in Pierce, there's no external humor. There's internal humor. He finds him funny when he's trying to be. And sometimes the meanness is his own personal joke. Sometimes he's not aware, but sometimes he's doing it thinking he's funny. But nobody around him finds it funny. And it's hard not to think that this was coming from Chevy and Chevy's desires and his tendencies comedically manifesting at this stage in his career, and his castmates just like not being amused by it. You know, not their characters, that lack of chemistry. You could feel like a stiffness almost. And now that I know some things just from watching the Chevy doc and doing some research for this episode, I'm going back and considering all the things I saw and realizing how many times the art was imitating life, because people saying things on camera they wish they could say off camera, right? That they are so sick of this person and just get rid of him, you know. But the maybe I've focused too much on Chevy here, because the character I still find up through season 3 nicely complex. I really enjoyed what they did for Pierce in season 3 and the growth we saw from him through the death of his father, his acceptance of his half brother. There's real growth in Pierce towards the end of season 3.
Yeah, my note here is whenever they let him lean into his own humanity, it worked.
Yeah, 100%. Whenever Pierce lets the ego and the facade go down, he's 100% at his best. It's just so hard to make that happen. And it is, I think, very indicative of the real life Chevy Chase in a way. And we'll get into later on the way that, unlike any other character, a lot of Pierce Hawthorne was mined from life, like just watching Chevy Chase be Chevy and being like, this is funny, let's put that in the show. And so, you know, you'll find later, it's hard not to take that personally when you suddenly don't like the direction your character's going in.
Yeah.
But I think you guys hit the nail on the head. I think it's so hard to watch Pierce at times, because Pierce's brand of humor, what Pierce wants, similar to Chevy Chase, it's just not it, for lack of a better term. And then when he's dragged kicking and screaming into humanity, it works suddenly. And suddenly Pierce is a part of the show. I think, like you said, Kris, watching the Chevy doc, the thing that struck me the most was all I knew about Chevy Chase as a human was that he was often rude and that he often found jokes at people's expenses or jokes that put people on their heels or something like that to be funny. So it's hard to be in a room with Chevy Chase if you weren't expecting to go to a Friars Club roast of your own personality that day. But to find that he came from an abusive household and that humor was his weapon too was like, oh, I get it. So like he grew up where, like, I grew up making my dad laugh and I loved making my dad laugh. But I don't know what kind of person I would be if I grew up making my dad laugh and it wasn't because of the joy we would share and more because fuck you, dad. So I don't know. Like, I think that explains a lot. But I think when it came time for him to join Community, he's a man who is used to being he kind of has to be the funniest person in the room for his persona to work. And another thing he's got working against him is he can often be the funniest person in the room. He's got that talent, but I think he also found himself in a room with like Donald Glover. He found himself in a room with, oh my God, the actress who plays Annie. I know her name. Alison Brie. Haha, got there. You know, Yvette Nicole Brown, Danny Pudi, like all of these people who are just these immense out of nowhere talents that he suddenly has to find himself gasping for airtime with.
Yeah. I also think of him as this guy who came from such a world of privilege, you know, as a man, as a white man. And I think a cast that had a little bit more diversity in it, that, you know, despite the fact that it liked to push its own boundaries, was also very, I think, socially conscious and socially aware, and usually trying to say something, because, you know, this show has so much heart. We've talked about it time and time again. And actually, as I prepped for this, there was an experience I kept thinking of from 2005. if you've listened to Media Lit, you know I talk about being an innocent little flower growing up, being very naive, not being exposed to too many things that were too horrific. And in 2005, my worldview changed when I watched a documentary that I'm guessing, Tyler, you and Allie have seen, and perhaps you, Kris, The Aristocrats.
No.
Are you familiar with The Aristocrats joke format?
I know the Aristocats.
So this is a
I'm sorry for the listener. Kris said that with like such an academic twinkle in his eye. I knew the Aristocats.
So this is a documentary. It was actually produced by Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller.
Oh, I know him.
It was dedicated to Johnny Carson because this was allegedly his favorite joke. But essentially, this was a whole documentary interviewing just every comedian under the sun. I remember this was what changed my view of Bob Saget. I forget if he's in it or if people just said Bob Saget told the most disgusting versions of the Aristocrats joke. But yeah, the joke is this family goes into a talent agency and they're like, no, we don't want to see your act. This wholesome family stuff is not what we're in for. And they're like, oh, no, that's not us. And then in the bit, the dad goes on to describe what their act is. And then it's just a free form like riff, just saying like disgusting, horrific, violent, sexualized, miserable, depraved things. And then at the end of the joke, when the producer asks, what's the name of the act? You just say, The Aristocrats. And,
Okay.
the one detail I remember from this documentary was like, this is like apparently so big with comedians. At one point, like on early SNL and stuff, like they would have parties where they would get together just to tell like Aristocrats jokes, like shock humor, sorts of disgustingly depraved jokes. And I'm going on this little diatribe here because, you know, I think of powerful people. It was dedicated to Johnny Carson. And I know Chevy was amongst the people who, you know, came up in this documentary. And the reason I find this relevant is just, I think he grew up in this world where being shocking, disgusting, pushing the envelope, and doing that for so many years in a world where there was no one to really ever push back or acknowledge that, you know, shocking people is not always equivalent to being funny. I think about how pervasive that sort of like world and conversation was, you know what I mean? Because when I thought of humor, I always think of like the most more wholesome humor tends to work for me a little bit better. But yeah, something about that documentary, just watching all these people who I thought of as like so pure and unencumbered, like sharing in this joke, and like structurally, like I get it. Like there's a version of that joke that would work for me. But I also vaguely remember some of these jokes getting really horrifically like depraved and horrible. So another long diatribe for me, but it unlocks something to me about like Chevy being like no, like what is this? I know what's best. I know what's funny. Yeah.
No, I think that's so smart, Randy. I'm glad you went there because I watched this whole documentary. I really enjoyed the watch, and I developed a tremendous amount. I think
the Chevy documentary.
The Chevy documentary. Yeah, I watched the full Chevy doc, and I think I developed a decent amount of understanding of empathy for this person.
Same.
Through these stories. Randy, part of like what you're describing, I think is really accurate because like for every Terry Sweeney, there are plenty of people who weren't offended by him, who didn't need an apology, who validated this humor and this behavior and thought that he was just, you know, great. And you can hear it even when they're reflecting on him in the doc. You know, Dan Aykroyd calls him dangerous, but exciting and fun, right? If you're going to be in a room with Chevy, you know it's going to be dangerous and exciting and fun. I think there are people who either thrived on it because they themselves were, despite being comedians, maybe not brave enough to really go there and be that much of an asshole. But I think plenty of them appreciate how much of a bit being an asshole can be if you're brave enough for it, right? And so I think Chevy was constantly validated in that direction, all the while being driven by, like, the thing that's being validated is actually, to your point, Tyler, horrifying coping mechanisms from a really damaging childhood. Behind every effed up grown up is a sad child who somebody just, you know, wronged in some way. And that's all over Chevy's story, quite obviously. But what was also really telling to me, not just like what developed empathy. I wasn't just understanding his backstory, but looking at his now. This is a man who still has people who love him deeply, not just his friends who had experiences and, have had enough distance to be able to like choose the fond memories. Like, he has a wife of very many decades who still walks alongside of him. He has daughters who speak fondly of him. I can't imagine that if all the worst things that we assume about Chevy based on his humor and his tendencies were true, that those relationships would be impossible to maintain, especially with his daughters today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because, like, listen, people stay in unhealthy relationships for the wrong reasons, but it didn't read to me like these were like abused people who had blinded themselves to his horrors because they didn't want to leave. There was genuine, deep love and affection from his wife and his daughters in this documentary that to me was like, if that's true, there's got to be the complexity to this man that he claims there is. And then at the same time, you still see the ego and the defensiveness in Chevy. There's times in this documentary where you really don't like him, despite watching these people speak kindly about him. Just very, very complex. And I think that's the hopefully the truest thing anybody can say of all of us, right? We're just human and we're messy.
Another thing that just hearing you guys talk that jumped to mind as well was, you look at the founding of SNL when Chevy was really like coming up and all of that. At the time, like now, it's like what makes for a new cast member on SNL? Well, they've probably got to be UCB trained to a certain degree. They've probably got to have an online following. Like, are they marketable? How many characters can they do? At the time, though, someone like Lorne Michaels was like, there wasn't that sort of like monoculture to comedy that there is today. And so it was a little like pick your fighter, and they'd better have some variety, which is why you had like no one else on the cast could do what Gilda Radner did. No one else on the cast could do what John Belushi did. And like, although his thing was being kind of a dick, no one else was doing that like Chevy Chase. He satisfied a very sort of important quadrant that I think the show and the cast needed.
And we do still want that. Version of that. Yeah.
We want original, unique people, whether they are jerks. I think we're cooling on a little bit, but at the time, Chevy's utility was the humor that he developed as a coping mechanism and all of that. And so it's kind of hard to look that person in the eye and say, hey, being unabashedly you, which in this case is kind of a jerk, like that's gotten you this far. But hey, it's 2009 and it's time for change. And it's like, okay, sure, whatever you say. Like that's maybe not what keeps the lights on in this mansion, but sure, I'll change because you said so. So it's an uphill battle for him. And like you said, Kris, very complex guy that would be easy to paint with a broad brush, but you really can't.
I'm feeling wistful over here. I'm just like, what if he had embraced the idea that like his character's changing and maybe there's some room to adapt his worldview?
And unfortunately, a lot of his downfall on the show comes from really not being able to do that and just deciding he knows what's funny and wanting to go whole hog into that. I'm reminded when you were saying too about like shock value and being as disgusting and whatnot as possible, not necessarily being funny. Anthony Jeselnik, of all people, who gets this reputation as like a particularly controversial and edgy comedian. I heard him in an interview say, I think he was quoting someone else, but he said, comedy is getting away with it. So if you can get out there and take a hot button issue, I'm just going to like use race as an example, and take an issue like that makes people comfortable, and you make a joke and people find it offensive or it makes people uncomfortable, you didn't get away with it. So you're a bad comedian. But if you find an absurd way to finally make people laugh about that, then you got away with it. And that's the mark of a good comedian. So whenever I see people out here being like, I'll just be really disgusting with no punchline, or I'm gonna say what people are afraid to, it's like, that's not comedy. You're not getting away with it. Like you gotta write something, be creative. And I think over time, Chevy sort of lost that ability.
Yeah, I like that Lorne Michaels quote where I think he was quoting Mel Brooks, comedy is polite hostility.
Yes.
That's a tricky balance to strike. Truly. And I think if you don't check yourself, like you do become truly hostile and malicious in the jokes. It's still the same stuff you're saying, but people can tell when there's venom behind it, and not just humor.
And alternatively, if there's no edge to it, that's also boring.
Exactly right. Yeah. Tough balance.
Any closing thoughts on Chevy before we move on to our next segment for this podcast, our little research paper?
I grew to like him enough to be really hurt for him about the SNL 50s show that he wasn't included in. To hear his daughter wish that he at least got to say, live from New York at Saturday night, I was bummed about that.
Yeah, I agree.
That's all I got.
I agree. Yeah, I ended up feeling for him in a way of like, if you could, Chevy Chase is a really nice guy if you're able to be in on his joke. But that's a tough, he makes that a tough threshold.
Yeah. I think all I have left to say is, at the very least, I'm excited to enjoy the end of his run alongside Kris when we get there.
Likewise. Yeah. And it is, and we're going to get into the story now of Community season 4, the Chevy Chase of it all. We're not going to get into like the specifics of Chevy. As you know, Kris, he does eventually leave the show. We're not going to get into the specifics of that just because that's sort of season 4 spoilers, but I'm going to try to set the stage of the temperature on set between seasons 3 and seasons 4, because if you are at all familiar with the story of Community, you know this is a particularly tumultuous time. And I'm going to run my good friends here through the story. I told them at the top of the podcast, I've written this all out. I'm about to do a very poor impression of one of my favorite podcasters, Marcus Parks from Last Podcast on the Left. But I'm going to do my best to sort of tell the story in as succinctly a way as possible of what was going on at this time, and what sort of started to bleed from just watching this show that people loved to like now the New York Post has things to say about the behind the scenes drama of Community. Like, let's figure out how that happened.
Never a good sign.
No, if you're being covered in the New York Post, my word. So I'm going to do my best. Guys, feel free to join in, interrupt, whatever, what have you. But let's get into it. This is my research paper that I'm very excited to have the opportunity to tell you guys. So as we've been saying, seasons 1 through 3 of Community, we're halfway done with this, remedial rewatch that we're doing. It's a good show. I think we can all agree it's a good show. At times, it's even a great show. We talked at the top about how there was this X factor, this special sauce. And a lot of that can be attributed to series creator Dan Harmon. A lot, like, that's debatable, but is a huge faction that would say he is the reason for that special sauce. He's got a very unique and brilliant mind. However, like all great things, the greatness does come at a cost. And if you asked writers, if you ask crew, if you ask some of the cast, Sony and NBC executives between 2009 and 2012, the human manifestation of that cost was series creator Dan Harmon. So by the end of season 3, Community was not a profitable show. However, through its quality, through its critical acclaim, through its just sort of like rabid fan base,
Subway endorsement,
very important, incredibly important, which we'll go on to see how important Subway becomes later on. Little tease for you, Kris.
Oh.
But it managed to claw its way for a full like 24 episode third season, which, if you know anything about the TV industry, puts it in a very interesting position. 4 full seasons of 24 episodes is typically the threshold with which a show can get syndicated, meaning other networks can buy up the episodes to air as reruns, fill their time blocks, and things like that. So at the time, it was rumored that both Comedy Central and Hulu had a deal cut with NBC and Sony for $850,000 per episode for Community, provided they could get a full season 4. So, for the first time in its entire history, Community was worth more alive than dead, provided they could make a season 4 easily, efficiently, and above all else, cheaply. And I came across, when I was researching, this interesting quote from Lorne, or a story Lorne Michaels told, I'm paraphrasing, but he was in an SNL exit interview and there was studio execs there. And basically they were saying, it's not uncommon for the network to sort of be indifferent to the quality of a show in terms of these larger business decisions. And he remembered a network executive saying, you were paid to create X amount of episodes on X amount of budget so that we could sell X amount of ad space. If you want to sit in my office and talk about how it needs to be good, that's on you. That's your thing. That's not what we do in here. And I think that is very indicative of the sort of uphill battle that creative types like your actors and like Dan Harmon, the series creator, that's the kind of battle they're dealing with. And if you're not really a businessman, if you're not really interested in that side of things, the TV industry can be a very difficult place for you. And Dan Harmon is not a man for whom quality can be swept under the rug in favor of business. That, coupled with his disdain for authority, meant he seemingly didn't think twice about costing the network money on delays, all of these things. And as we'll soon get to, those delays were often in service of quality. I gave you guys a little homework to show just how much he'll stay up late doing, like, making sure the silliest, most profane thing is perfect. But being a perfectionist and kind of a difficult artist is not a reason to fire a showrunner, let alone a series creator. So I think I asked you guys both this a little bit up top, but what do you know about the firing of Dan Harmon just through cultural osmosis that you've picked up over the years?
I would say I don't know much more than what you just said, Tyler. I think even prepping for this podcast made me realize that, Chevy was not the only one pissing people off behind the scenes. Dan Harmon was doing plenty of that. I found the Harmontown documentary really fascinating because I'm someone who loves to daydream about getting paid to do creative work. But then I think about my own disdain for authority and, even doing podcasting for fun and not for money. Like, I've known the sting of creative differences, not with you, Kris.
Never.
You're perfect, man. But yeah, like these things can happen.
I love you guys.
Even on a small scale, right? So I do think about, how emotionally frustrating those moments must be, because when you do come up with something that's good and that hits, it will deliver for those business types. But being good doesn't always mean it delivers, right? We were just talking about Freaks and Geeks a few minutes ago.
Absolutely. Great example. Kris, what do you think? What have you known anything?
No, same as Randy. I had this vague idea, like the name Dan Harmon, synonymous with great comedy, and also like, wait, isn't he kind of a dick? Like, is that somebody? Wait, you want to Google, like, is Dan Harmon problematic before you advocate too heavily for like things of his that you like? I guess is an impression I've generally had in my conversations with friends. Like Randy, I think of Owen, who we've had on the podcast before for Saving Silverman. Go back and listen to our Saving Silverman coverage. Great episode of media.lit.
Mm-hmm.
So
Owen's big into comedy. I vaguely recall him talking about his love for Community and Dan Harmon, but also I remember him hinting at the idea that maybe Harmon he's a complicated figure himself. So yeah, I don't know a ton of the details, but I know that at some point it was a conflict with Necky, as you said, Tyler. Like, I had the idea that he just didn't jive with network.
Yeah.
There was so much friction that it was time to say goodbye.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, if I had to tell this story in one sentence, you just did. He didn't jive with the network and it was time to say goodbye. But we're Media Lit, so we're going to get into a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, we're an offshoot of Media Lit. I won't steal the badge of honor from you two.
But Media Lit. This counts towards our 100 episode count, Tyler.
Yeah, dude, you
Hell
are
yeah.
Media Lit.
Oh, thank you. I truly, I'm not exaggerating. I do feel like I've been knighted just now. That's high praise. Thank you, guys.
Couldn't come off mute fast enough. I was, come on, buddy.
Yeah, for those of you, a great experience, a great reason to listen to this on YouTube or to watch this on YouTube is, I just saw Kris be a dad more than I've ever seen him. He gave the one finger up of like, hold everything. And I did. I was like, oh, hang on, Kris has to speak. Randy, quiet. Kris is speaking.
I most certainly did.
Well, I was knighting you.
You were. Look, the dad finger, the dad snapper, the dad whistle. I will, like a dog, like perking up.
Yeah,
those don't go away.
We are well trained. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention too, because I don't get into sort of Harmon's history and the rest of the story, but real quick, because you said you watched the Harmontown documentary, and Randy, I'm so proud of you. He, like Chevy, is another guy where it's like, it's hard to tell him that you need to fall in line because his rise to prominence was also unique. He wrote, he didn't create, but his friend Rob Schraub created Scud the Disposable Assassin. It's a comic book. I've read a little bit of it. It's hilarious. The premise is it takes place in a world where you can buy a robot assassin from a vending machine for like $2.
Yep.
It will kill its target and then self-destruct. And you follow one of these robots who realizes, if I kill my target, I'm going to die. So he spends his time keeping his target alive and on life support and all of these things, using his skills as a robot assassin. It's hilarious. And Rob Schraub does a lot of like wacky ones, and it's very over the top and funny. And then there'll be issues written by Dan Harmon that are further progressing the story. And these two got picked up by Hollywood because this comic was so good. It got a huge cult following. So they made Heat Vision and Jack, which we won't get into too much, but it was at the time the most expensive pilot ever made. It starred Jack Black. It was produced by Ben Stiller. It was a lot of work. It was very funny. It was like the unaired pilot itself got a cult following, but it never got picked up to network. It was just ended up being a huge waste of money. But that was Dan Harmon's foot in the door. Bob's Your Uncle. Now someone is trusting him with a show of his own, Community. And, to sort of take it back to the story, Harmon had a lot of perfectionist tendencies, as we'll get into with his story circle and things like that. We've said in one way or another that the show had this special sauce, and that could be Dan Harmon because he would be in the writer's room. Every script that came through, he had to give like the Harmon pass to make sure it fit the story, fit the tone, fit his voice, fit his idea for the show. He would also sit in the editing bay and have a hand in like making sure the finished product was edited in a way he liked. And if you don't know TV, like that's not really done. And if you just know anything about managing, like imagine being a writer, editor, what have you on Community. This fucking guy is micromanaging the hell out of you. Episodes would be delayed because he would be working on scripts up to and on shoot days, which meant actors were showing up to set and they didn't have a script. They didn't know what they were there to do. Some were okay with this. It seems like Joel McHale liked Dan Harmon, liked his writing, and was willing to play ball with this. But you look at someone like Chevy Chase coming from his older show business background, and you're telling me he's showing up to set and he can't know what his lines are. Like that's unprofessional, and it's not the business that he grew up used to. The network started to get prickly when table reads were delayed. And apparently on 2 occasions, reportedly, they were straight up canceled. So if you're trying to deliver episodes on time and you're hearing the table read is getting delayed because one guy is a perfectionist / procrastinator, suddenly, you're keeping some execs on set to sort of keep an eye on things.
Well, like in that documentary, like I had not somehow caught the story of like Chevy's voicemail to Dan Harmon. Like
we'll get into that.
The suck my dick voicemail to Dan Harmon. I was like, okay, I've got a deeper picture of this.
They hated each other toward the end, but also similar with like the Joel McHale respect. They hated each other, but they respected each other. It was like it was a very like gentleman pistols at dawn sort of story between them.
He hated him, but also said, I will leave the show if he doesn't return.
Yeah.
Classic.
Another thing about series creator Dan Harmon, who is, as I said, micromanaging every aspect of this, he is a terrific drinker. One of my favorite quotes of his that he said on this like History Channel sketch show he had was, quote, "I prefer vodka. It's odorless, so you can get away with more." Like that's when you listen to episodes of Harmontown, he's just pouring vodka after vodka. He is a drinking person. Now it's not clear if this was a result of the drinking, but he would reportedly show up to work hours late, which further delays. And he also disappeared to San Francisco around the time of the SF Sketch Fest for multiple days and like didn't really have permission to do so, which further messed with Community's like schedule that year and all of these things. Again, all things that a network is kind of clocking as red flags.
You can just see this all feeding in on itself.
Yeah. Like how bad of an employee do you have to be before you're, and this is a man in his 30s and he's exhibiting tendencies that like I exhibited during my summer job between college when I would be like drinking all night and showing up to work hungover and, forgetting how to make change at the register. But you're at the head of a network sitcom sort of exhibiting this behavior. There's only so much you can get away with, even if your drink of choice is odorless.
Yeah. And if you're already a procrastinating perfectionist, the substance abuse doesn't help.
Yeah. Which procrastinating perfectionist too is like two things that just bump. Like you can't be.
You said that. It made me think of Billy Walsh from Entourage, fictional director Billy Walsh from Entourage. Just couldn't get Medellin done. He was too obsessed.
Yeah, man. I wanted to give Dan Harmon a hug in that documentary. Like
Yes.
Like there are at least 2 different occasions where he just starts like waxing poetic about like being a baby when you have no responsibilities and someone just takes care of you. And I was like, man, this dude's not in a good place.
Oh,
No.
man.
Really not. Especially when you, for those who don't know, the Harmontown documentary, we'll get into it a little later, but it takes place after he's been fired, before he got brought back to the show. And yeah, he's in a weird place. It's interesting to see a man for whom it's like what Harvey Dent was talking about. Like, you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. He had the conclusion to his hero's journey, and now he's in this weird 4th act that someone who
Marked out.
yeah, someone who codifies story as much as he does, living in a 4th act must be a nightmare.
Ooh.
So it's, there's a lot to unpack there, and the documentary is fascinating because it's a portrait of a man who's not in a good place, but still needs validation. So he seeks it on the road from strangers.
Uncool.
Aw.
Now we're getting into it.
Yeah.
Another funny thing that we just to like put a button on his drinking and his on-set issues was there was actually a Tumblr blog that was made between 2009 and 2012 called Sleepy Harmon, and it just documented pictures of him asleep on set. He would just fall asleep in the middle of the workday in random places. And I also just want to cast our minds back to this woebegone era of when a symptom of being like so terminally online was you would start a niche Tumblr blog. Now, like, the symptom of being terminally online is someone whose hate and ignorance is going to destroy the world. But back then wasn't it just so wholesome just to have a Tumblr that you could fuck around with and make people laugh with? Times have changed, but I digress.
Simpler times.
Yes. It's also worth mentioning, speaking of not so simple times, it's also worth mentioning that it came out years after this whole controversy, that Harmon was sort of inappropriately pursuing a female underling on the show named Megan Gantz. She was a writer. She came out and said that he was really pursuing her romantically. He was unabashed about it. And so it made her feel weird about, her actual success as a writer. Am I getting promoted because the boss wants to screw me? Or am I getting promoted because, my work is actually good? And for what it's worth, she's an incredible writer. She's worked on the show Mythic Quest, Always Sunny. She wrote some of the best Community episodes, including the Basic Lupine Urology, the one we did where they are figuring out who hurt the potato. Yeah. She has an incredible resume. At the time it all came out, Harmon apologized privately and publicly. She accepted the apology, and for the sake of our purposes here, we can just leave it at that. But all this is to say there was a ton of friction going on set, and what started out as maybe eccentricities became an active hindrance by the end of season 3. After several all-nighters among the writing staff due to Harmon's infuriating combo of, like we were saying, perfectionism and procrastination, it was reported, I think by the Hollywood Reporter at the time, that so many of the writers and crew were essentially saying, we're gone if Harmon stays. So as much as the quality of the show, as much as there was that special sauce, what have you, there was real like workplace cost going on. There was a really toxic environment that this was all being born out of. And I'm curious about like sort of you guys, I've personally worked in a few toxic work environments. I've personally had bosses who were not up to snuff when it comes to really managing people, managing the workload and things like that. And I'm curious if you guys have any experiences like that, just bosses in your history where you would just love to see them get fired finally. And if so, name names, first and last.
No, I've been fortunate enough to mostly avoid that in my life. I don't think I'd be able to stomach it for very long. So perhaps for the best. No, I've been fairly fortunate. I remember one manager telling me if there's time to lean, there's time to clean, and that was frustrating. But I don't recall much toxicity in my past.
My most toxic boss, like, also owned the restaurant. But to watch this woman make every single waitress cry over the course of like the 8 months that I worked there as a high school student was not my favorite. I've largely been luckier with bosses than that. But like, it's kind of funny because I kind of find myself wanting to circle this back to the Dan Harmon conversation. I was one.
Please do my job for me.
Well, like, listen, I was one of the original fans of The Daily Show, like back in the Craig Kilborn days.
Yeah.
Before Jon Stewart even made it onto the show. And a few years ago, I read the oral history of The Daily Show, which was a really interesting book. And, part of it was about like kind of early in Jon Stewart's run, like not initially being super receptive to like supporting like the staff of The Daily Show, like unionization type things, because he had worked in an industry where like you just didn't get that support. But, I also saw a world in which he kind of learned and adapted and changed and grew. And it certainly sounds like Dan Harmon was struggling with that part of the job. Because when you do step into the boss's chair, it can't be asleep on set.
Yeah, 100%. You can't be asleep on set. You can't be drinking. You can't be disrespectful of other people's time. But at the same time, he's a person for whom was like, all of that is true, but what is paramount is that the finished product is great. And like, damn it, it was. Like, I watched the first 3 seasons of Community before knowing any of this. We're not even at the part in the story where I like got hip to this whole story that was going on behind the scenes and things like that. So for a while, it was just imagine like working for this toxic boss. And then every time you open up one of the trades, it's like, or like go on Reddit, it's people being like, this show is brilliant. Whatever they're doing, don't change a thing. That must have been pretty tough. And I can remember, I can sympathize with maybe some of the writers being like, season 4, I get my payout, I get syndication, fucking lose this guy, whatever. We don't need him. We'll make the show without him. Enough's enough. The fans can deal. Because, in addition to that, there was also Harmon's public persona, which showrunners don't typically have. The only other I can think of, like Chuck Lorre, for better or worse. Like, I can't tell you like the personal life or some controversies of a showrunner off the top of my head. But in addition to being very prolific on Tumblr and Twitter and Reddit, like Harmon would post, and again, he'd post while drinking or something like that. He was not afraid to engage with fans, which at the time was actually kind of a novel idea. It was something I found interesting. I look at someone like Stephen Moffat through like the Doctor Who era, where I'm a little like, you started reading your own fandom a little too much and it inferred storytelling and we can agree, debate that till the cows come home. But it was interesting to see someone navigate that. But also in addition to that, he had the Harmontown podcast, which we'll get into a little bit later. But once a week, this guy was getting drunk, going to Meltdown Comics, and just babbling into a microphone. And that got him into some trouble that we're going to get into here in a minute. But, anytime someone was hearing about Dan Harmon, it was a negative reflection on Community. And once again, we probably have network executives hitting that little like red flag buzzer. Because again, all of this is being done under the backdrop of we need one more season. I don't care how we get it. We need 24 episodes, and this show is profitable again. Everyone who fought for Community, all of this, like they get their vindication. Okay, so how do we make these last 24 episodes happen? And this sort of the public persona, the last straw. It's probably disingenuous to call this the last straw, but in terms of telling the straightest line through this story, we'll say that the Chevy Chase voicemail that Randy mentioned earlier was kind of the last straw. And this is where people like me, with my level of fandom, really started to hear that things were going on behind the scenes. While filming a key scene in season 3, Chevy Chase had enough with just what was going on set. He was frustrated with his character, all of these things. And he walked off before filming a crucial scene in, I think it was the finale episode. A crucial like monologue that his character needed. And when you look at a perfectionist like Dan Harmon, who like maps out everything, when you have an actor who refuses to satisfy the story that you've written, that's going to be pretty grating for them, pretty unacceptable for them.
He could have at least had the decency to walk out on the Swami scene.
Yes, exactly.
I'd rather have lost that one.
Yes, agreed. But instead, I think it was like a heartfelt monologue or something, and instead we got Swami and brownface. Like, let's just steer into that headlong. Like Chevy Chase did a brownface joke, and then the joke was that it was brownface, but it wasn't good. A bit of a misstep.
Wanted to be doing
exactly. In fact, I have a quote here from Dan Harmon that he gave after the fact, but it was, quote, Chevy's a befuddled old man, but he's also the guy who calls you into his trailer and shakes the script in the air and says, I'm not a befuddled man. I'm sexy. I could be the star of this show. I'm not gay. You're writing me as gay. All of these things that are just not okay and indicative of what you were talking about, Randy, of just a man who doesn't really want to change with the times. He thinks he knows comedy. He knows what's best. He knows what should be at the forefront of this show. Why aren't you letting me do it? And Harmon's reaction to that would be to tell him, like, do you understand that this speech you're giving me right now is funny? Like, this is a character. And he would use that stuff in the show. So again, Chevy is being like, I fucking hate this. And then the next thing you know, he's got a monologue where he says, I fucking hate this. Like, it's hard not to take that personally. All this kind of this back and forth, this animosity culminated at the season 3 wrap party, where Dan Harmon, allegedly with a vodka in hand, when Chevy walked in with his daughters, tried to get the crowd to chant, fuck you, Chevy. Some did, but by and large, as I understand it, the majority of the room wasn't really into it because you've got, toxic thing 1 trying to get you to rally against toxic thing 2. I kind of just want to go home. It's a tough moment. It's two men not being their best. And also, when watching the Chevy doc, you really felt for Chevy too. This was him bringing his family into a space after, let's face it, the failure that was the Chevy Chase show. Community was his first real foray back into the public eye, and this was the treatment he was getting. Now, a lot of that was, again, him refusing to change with the times, recognize what the humor of the show was, all of that. But a fuck you chant from the cast and crew is not what you want. And reasonably upset, he left a lengthy, profanity-filled voicemail on Dan Harmon's answering machine or voicemail, what have you. And you can hear that voicemail because at a taping of Harmontown, or they weren't taping the show yet, but someone obviously recorded it on their phone. Harmon played the voicemail into a microphone, literally holding a microphone, and played it for the audience. Again, in an act to get them to make Chevy Chase the butt of the joke, which, isn't very funny. And then we're talking Variety, Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, all pick up this Chevy Chase rant against series, community creator Dan Harmon. Chevy calls the show unfunny and all of this, says he hates his character. That's the kind of stuff that makes news. And that's when I first heard about all of this. And, cut to May 18th, 2012. Dan Harmon was on a flight to LAX, and as soon as his plane hit the tarmac, he turned his phone off airplane mode to see that he had a message from his agent. After 3 years, after bringing us everything we got from Community, for better or worse, whether it was, hitting on an underling, whether it was micromanaging the editing bay, micromanaging the writer's room, all of these things, we got this incredible show. But Dan Harmon had a message from his agent saying that he was out. Speaking to the Hollywood Reporter, Dan Harmon said, quote, I remember feeling an odd sensation of relief, which I understand criminals feel when they get caught. Maybe my insecurity made me feel like I finally got caught making a show sort of reviled by everyone paying for it. And my 3-year crime spree was over. And that is, a truncated, succinct version of the story of how Dan Harmon was fired from Community. It was announced that Moses Port and I'm probably going to pronounce this last name incorrectly, Dave Grisio, would be taking over as co-showrunners on season 4. Chevy Chase was sticking with the show, but all of that editing bay, all of the Harmon pass, all of these things, even the last minute rewrites, the story circle, all of that was walking out the door with Dan Harmon, and season 4 was going to continue. Where they were going to make their syndication deals, but they were going to do it without arguably one of the things that made the show, the special show that we've been seeing. And that's what we're in for when we go into these next episodes, is a change. Diehard fans of Community, obviously we're backing Dan Harmon. I'm excited to watch it in a 2026 lens to see, was it that bad or was it just different? And I'm excited to see Kris run through it. But for better or worse, that's the story of season 3 to 4 of Community, how it was picked up and how one of the most important people behind the show got the boot, for better or worse.
Man, brilliantly delivered. Thank you for all that research. Thank you for laying it out for us. My gosh, what a tragic tale. Because even right to the very end there, to hear his takeaway from it, it's almost like somebody with body dysmorphia. They can't quite see themselves how other people see them. For his takeaway to be, oh, I finally got caught. making this thing that everybody who pays for it like kind of secretly hates. And now no, dude, it's not. They like the thing you make. That's why you got to keep making it, despite you being a significant problem. Like him, like his perfectionism, making him in that moment think like it just was never. It was too weird. It was too awful. It wasn't good enough. Like, nah, dude. It's just like you have some really significant things you need to work on, so we can keep working together. That's a bummer.
And all I can hear is just like the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like he got himself at the helm of this show, and it sounds like it was more responsibility than he wanted. That fear to trust anyone else, that down to, you know, the acting out in those really dramatic ways.
Yeah, it can be dangerous. Someone who understands, I would say someone who believes that they have a unique mind, and someone who feels the need to find ways to protect that. So for Dan Harmon, it seems like that manifested in a problem with authority, with not taking any other notes seriously, being like, I know what's best. My brilliant mind is at work. Also, not for nothing, this engine is fueled by vodka, insecurity, and meanness. Like, it's and a desire to yell into a microphone as well. Like he needed approval from other people, which he couldn't get fully from writing scripts that were Community, that were, by the way, semi-autobiographical. He was doing Community College for a while and saw the kind of crazy characters you met. I talked about it in the first few episodes where it's very true to life for a community college. And like, in many ways, Joel McHale's character, Jeff Winger, was an amalgamation of him and his podcast host, Jeff Brian Davis. So he dated a woman who was a Brita, like all of these things. Community's a very autobiographical show, but that wasn't enough. He still needed to go and do a podcast every week called Harmontown, where he's just the mayor and everyone in the audience are his residents. And that can get you into trouble. As people who babble into a microphone quite often know, there's a certain responsibility here.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Yeah, but so that's the long and short of the story. And now we're going to talk a little bit about, I think one of the things at the heart of this is dissecting that special sauce. And anyone who has studied writing in the last few years, or I think been our particular brand of, digesting pop culture nerd, you've probably heard about Dan Harmon's Story Circle. I was certainly fascinated by it. A lot of people are. And so I just want to read off. So for those who are unfamiliar, it's based on Joseph Campbell's 17 steps for the monomyth, and it's just Hero with 1,000 Faces. Joseph Campbell was obsessed with kind of codifying the hero's journey, the process of writing a story. Why do some stories work and some stories don't? Is there a formula to this? And Dan Harmon was writing the movie Monster House and was like, I can build off of that. I can codify this. So he took that and made this story circle with 8 distinct steps. And if you'll just imagine hands on a clock, but the clock only has 8. The step 1 is a character is in a zone of comfort. Step 2, they want something. Step 3, they enter an unfamiliar situation. Step 4, they adapt to it. Step 5, they get what they wanted. Step 6, they pay a heavy price for it. Step 7, they return to their familiar situation. Step 8, they have changed. And I don't know about you, but when I read that, when I hear it rattled off, I'm picturing Frodo in the Shire and then on his way to Mordor. I'm picturing these epic stories. When you think of Joseph Campbell, you're thinking Hero with 1,000 Faces, the Odyssey, all of these things, which is why I gave you guys a little bit of homework for our listener. It is a segment of the Harmontown documentary that I believe starts about 12 minutes in, if you want to pause and go listen to that. It's just an excerpt where he and his podcast co-host, Jeff Davis, write a song to perform because they know Monty Python's Eric Idle is going to come and sing a song with them, so they have to write it. And it is a song about basically Dan's mama taking on a lot of men, we'll say.
In various
ways. Yes. I believe the chorus is taking boners by the pound. something very stupid. I was like, I have to show them this to illustrate this point, but I put in the programming notes, this isn't safe for work, by the way. This is going to get crass, but
watch it.
The Aristocrats.
That
song
was
is basically the Aristocrats. Yeah,
you may as well
Nice.
be on a clock tower with a sniper rifle. That was perfect.
Yeah,
That was
that
so
was-
good, Randy. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys thought of just watching that writing process on something so insane and lowbrow, but seeing that like writing, they're talking about meeting with the goddess and all of these things. Like, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, like hearing them talk about like now you have to adapt to it. You've come through. Now we're all singing together and applying it to like the moment in the song. Just brilliant. It's obsessive. Honestly, it's sick, but it's really impressive. It's how you get quality work. But yeah, they look insane. It's like Charlie Day in front of the board. I was looking at the whiteboard in the background. They've got the circles drawn. They got the dashes, and yeah, I mean they're really working the tool, and it's really cool to see that. It's not just like an idea in his head. He really like works the thing practically.
I love that. And I think what I really loved about it too is like they're using the circle for the song, but it's also for the performance.
Mhm.
Because they do seem to want the audience to believe that this is transpiring somewhat in real time.
Yeah.
Right. So it's also like, how is Dan going to play this off when the song starts? Right. Because it's like, I mean, if you love comedy, you love Eric Idle. I've had a hankering to go back and rewatch The Meaning of Life ever since I watched this clip. Because like Eric Idle is very much in Meaning of Life mode for me on this one. But yeah, so to see that performance play out and pull out what is going to be magical about Eric Idle's voice, get him to push the envelope in a slightly different way than we saw on screen from the Pythons, although I'm sure not in a way that felt unfamiliar to Eric Idle.
Yeah.
You keep referencing Python. He's not the guy from Casper, the Friendly Ghost.
Well
Kris,
said, well said.
you guys are the best. I love, like, we just grew up on the same collection of VHSs, didn't we?
Yeah, we really did.
Oh, hell yeah.
All right, I just have to bring this up because
Please.
I can't even remember which podcast this was a clip from on my algorithm. But it was just we recently all talked about Wild America with Devin Sawa.
Hell yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it was just a podcast clip, and the female host was like talking about Casper. She's like, "Oh, you know, I had a crush on Casper," and like the host like, "Yeah, no, not Devin Sawa, the ghost." But she was just like entirely
bald-headed
serious,
ghost.
yeah. And like it kind of played out in this whole like I was that afraid of rejection that I had to be attracted to the wide-eyed, opaque ghost.
Amazing.
I love that movie. When he looks in the mirror and he's the crypt keeper and he just does the
Yeah.
Macaulay Culkin, like, yeah, I love that. Got me every time when I was a kid.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Side up makes me yak.
And he just turns his hand into a spatula. That movie made Being a Ghost seem awesome.
Totally.
I'm just glad I was here to cover Northern Exposure, Casper.
Hell yeah.
I'm on the money.
But anyway, so, but just to put a pin on it, I think like when we talk about Community, when we talk about all of this controversy behind the set, when we talk about how toxic it might have been for him to pull these all-nighters, get in the editing bay, there is something to be said about a singular voice, a singular mind bringing content to the table. And we're going to see, I am of the opinion that season 4 lacks that quite a bit. But, I hesitate to call it a bad season. One thing I also think is worth noting as we talk about, actually, I'll get into that in the next thing. Right now, are there any guys closing thoughts on just this Dan Harmon story, this Dan Harmon effect on Community, and what you might be thinking about going into season 4?
Well, here on Media Lit, we treat each piece of media like great literature. And I think that's what the obsession with the story circle does, right? Like we can be telling an absurd story with an absurd premise, but we've got circles within circles. You can attach this to a single episode, or you can attach this to Jeff Winger's arc through seasons 1 through 3, right? Like we know the series is going to go on, but if it had ended there, we completed that arc at the end of the season. You know, like he's on the precipice of returning to his practice. He's rejected a chance to fall back into his exact same old ways. And you know, there's balance to it. You know, if this show had ended, it was not a bad end for the show. I'm glad it didn't end there, but it would have worked. It wouldn't have felt like a cancellation out of nowhere.
Agreed.
So thank you, Circles.
Yeah. Whether it's like a circle on the episode, a circle on the season, I think upon talking to you guys about this show and really breaking it down and analyzing it, I have been struck by how much I didn't realize when watching it, like episode to episode, you feel that completeness, that balance that you're talking about. But I've also been noticing talking to you guys, the season-long arcs a little more, where we talk about what they've all learned, how they've all changed, and how season 3 is about them applying those changes and living as the new people they are. I think that was also put on a circle somewhere at some point as well, and it matters.
Yeah, and I think that you can tell within that, each character had their own circle for every episode and the whole season, right? So like any given episode, you've got the circle for the episode, and then there's Abed's circle within the episode, and there's Annie's circle within the episode, and there's the ways in which those overlap, and they have to inform each other. You can see the complexity of it there, which is probably why it always feels so sincere and valuable. No matter how absurd, it never feels thrown away or thrown in for no purpose at all. You know, it isn't just like a giant chicken walking through the frame for the sake of a guy in a giant chicken costume, right?
Right.
There's, no matter how absurd, you can tell like the absurdity was mapped on one of these circles, and it has real purpose for driving our characters forward, either within the circle of that episode or within the larger circle of the season in their own arc.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's an effective writing. I mean, I've never written a script, but it seems like an effective writing technique. It seems like keeping an eye on that balance is important, and it's why every aspect of Community just really just feels complete and balanced.
It's probably why they never quite lost track of a character like Britta, right? I think I've compared her in the past to Eric Matthews from Boy Meets World.
Yes.
At some point, they stopped doing circles for Eric, right?
Yes.
He was like a vague idea within the larger circle, perhaps. While we have problems, I think, with some of the changes Britta has gone through over the course of the seasons, you know, we've nitpicked some of her story arcs. You can tell they've never stopped paying attention to her. Even if they found new ways of working with her, they've evolved the ways in which they thought they were going to use this character within the ensemble. It's never become negligent. She's never just like a character who's floundering amongst the ensemble. It must be due to these circles.
She's perpetually stuck in the adapt to it stage of the story circle at this point.
Yes.
Sorry,
go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say, I also think that helps when you do run every character through this kind of circle, through any kind of filter, really. It allows you to say like, okay, well, there's not a lot of oxygen on Britta right now, but hey, on Troy, we've got this whole manhood arc that we can play with. Let's lean into that. It really can inform storytelling.
I was just going to say, being super conscious about this type of story circle, like you said, it's the hero's journey. It usually works out pretty well. We've got an episode coming out next week on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You know, a great film, you know, loosely based on the Odyssey, but really more so based on this story circle than like the finer points and details of the Odyssey. We recently did an episode on, you know, a 9-minute episode of Bluey called Curry Quest that goes out of its way to put the hero's journey front and center. I'm sure Dan Harmon would love it. But yeah, like great television, great writing. Bluey's one of the greats. They do it. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou does it. And it's baked into good storytelling.
Yeah.
Yep. And you can listen to these boys when they talk about it, because they have digested more media and they have analyzed it more than so many people. So this is one of the reasons I was excited to talk about this particular aspect of the podcast with you guys, because you digest so much in such an analytical way that it's interesting to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Crazy how multi-talented. I'm so glad you introduced me to this, so I can just value Dan Harmon's talent that much more deeply. Not only does he have the chops comedically, but like this is big brain stuff. I love the way in that article you shared that he says he can't not see the circles. Like it's tattooed on his brain. When he's watching stories, he's just like, almost like in Disclosure Day, Josh O'Connor's character, he hears the clicking and he just like understands it in English intrinsically. Somehow Dan Harmon like looks at stories and he just like sees this underneath it all. So impressive Thanks you for sharing.
Yeah, of course, yes. I did all get that from the article Randy sent as well. What the other thing I like about it too is because this is also, it's currently ongoing. And I know we're talking about getting a community movie, but there's also the story circles are applying to every episode of Rick and Morty. And what I think is interesting is we talk about Dan Harmon having sort of a singular mind, being a genius and things like that. But that's not what the story circle is. It's more of a thing he discovered. It works. It doesn't need any one mind to run a story through a story circle. It works the way a ladder works. It works the way a bow and arrow works. It's for everyone. It's the perfect design. It's it's going to work no matter what your story is, no matter what you're running through it. And he's less of a, Henry Ford and more of a Jacques Cousteau. He's just found something.
I do have to just sneak in a Kurt Vonnegut reference, as one does.
As one does, casually.
Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut has his 8 rules for creative writing, and there's only one that I can attach directly to the story circle. They're very different goals from Kurt Vonnegut, but I love the way he phrased number 2, which is every character should want something, even if it's just a glass of water.
I like that.
Love that.
So the spirit's there.
I'm also feeling relieved. I think that the number of podcasting hours that have gone by since you dropped a Gatsby or Vonnegut reference, it's getting too high. So I'm really grateful you reset the meter.
Yeah.
Gatsby, Daisy, Jordan, the whole crew's always there.
Every once in a while, I'll just ask like a really just really over the plate question to my wife, Allie. Just like it's just a little like clone check, like, hey, you're still obsessed with like Kurt Vonnegut, right? Like, why don't you drop a reference real quick? Why don't you drop one right now, Earthling?
That is amazing. Have I heard you guys talk about that on Not Couple Goals before? I think
maybe I've probably just done it on Not Couple Goals before.
Yeah. We're all just here to fart around.
Yeah, we're just having fun out here. So before we get into the last of what we have for this particular research paper episode, I would personally be remiss if I got through the entirety of Remedial Rewatch of this episode specifically if I didn't talk about another very tangential part of the community fandom, which is the Harmontown podcast. And Randy, I'm so relieved to hear that you watched the Harmontown documentary. I think you might have a little more of an understanding. So after the whole Chevy Chase thing, after the voicemail of it all, I was like, the creator of Community has a podcast. I love podcasts. I had just moved to New York. I was commuting on the subway every day. I was like, let me give this a shot. And it's the perfect sort of like junk food podcast to have on in the background because the premise is he goes out there, he's got a live audience, he does not prepare anything, like things where he prepared the Eric Idle song. Those were a rarity that he did for quality purposes because holy crap, we've got Eric Idle. Like we can't just have him up on stage and be like, did anyone ever see the Chris Farley show on SNL?
I love that sketch.
It's so sweet and wholesome. Now imagine if Chris Farley was a caustic showrunner who was drunk on vodka. Like that's a lot of what Harmontown is. So, but anyway, I started listening to it and it was just an interesting, source of community. You know what I mean? We can actually thank of all people, Emily V. Gordon, very well known as Kumail Nanjiani's wife, but she should be well known as a writer, producer, the mind behind so many of the shows that were born out of the Meltdown comics in Los Angeles. It was just this new sort of alt theater, very tiny. And it was just like a party of the cool people. It was The Indoor Kids, which was the name of her podcast. She's just brilliant. I love her.
Perfect.
But she was like, Harmon, you have this need to be heard by people. Why don't you just have a show every week where you talk into a microphone? And then they started recording it. It became a very successful podcast that went from, I don't know when they started doing the live show, but they recorded the live shows from 2012 to 2019 weekly. Wow. No show, just a group of people, a revolving door of friends, a revolving door of regular attendees. And then there was the Harmontown documentary where he did kind of like a Conan O'Brien thing where he got kicked out off of his show by NBC and just took this show on the road to see what was out there.
Yeah.
And that's what the documentary covers. But Harmontown itself, for me anyway, and for a lot of people, the Venn diagram of community fans and Harmontown fans has overlap, but maybe less than you'd think. They're very different shows. It wasn't necessarily about a love for community or anything like that. It was a place where a lot of people who, like they cover in the documentary, don't fit into typical places, maybe need a little bit more than the community they can find on Reddit.
Yes.
It brought them not to sound overly saccharine, but it gave them some community once a week. You would just go and there would be like-minded people sharing like-minded humor. You could listen to it, or you could go and attend if you lived in the greater Los Angeles area. Or, if you could see the tour, they would travel sometimes. They would go to New York and things like that. So it was just a place where if you were a Harmontown fan, you could kind of clock another one in the crowd, and it just created a space for people, who maybe needed community, maybe were on sort of the neurodivergent spectrum and things like that. It was a built-in place for people to find their people. And I think one of the most exemplary things about that is the story of Spencer Crittenden, who in the documentary they cover, but you can go back and listen to an episode where Jeff Davis, who you might know from Whose Line Is It Anyway? He was a regular fourth chair in Whose Line Is It Anyway? Great performer, really funny guy. They decided they wanted to play D&D on stage, which now you've got Dimension 20 selling out Madison Square Garden. But this was 2012. This was my first foray into what D&D even was. Now you can see I'm never without some dice by my desk. I loved playing with my friends. But Spencer showed up to the show that night thinking it would be really cool to be able to play Dungeons and Dragons with Dan Harmon. And that happened to be the show where they were like, is there a dungeon master in the audience? We'll give you free tickets next week if you run us through a game. Spencer shot his hand up, and Spencer is a very introverted guy, a guy who seemed like he struggled to find friends and date and things like that.
So Tyler,
please,
in the documentary, when they interview his mom, I almost cried. It was so adorable. Like, she was so happy he found that outlet.
Yeah, I'm sure his parents were kind of like worried about him, as a lot of parents might be. He was, a nice guy, a smart guy, but maybe a directionless guy. I'm a guy who, you can only go for so many jobs with that beard. And he's also like a dungeon master, like a full on like professional. Like, he took it very seriously. He was a creative living in Los Angeles, unable to maybe network the way you need to for one's creativity to shine. But he went to a podcast recording one day and literally got plucked from the crowd out of obscurity. And he became one of the best like parts of Harmontown. They would end every episode with about 20 minutes of Dungeons and Dragons. If they had a surprise guest, Spencer could incorporate them into the show. They would do this fun little improv game where Spencer would just be like, give me a monster. And they'd be like, okay, the tooth beast. And he'd be like, gnarling and gnashing with of the sound of ivory on ivory. He could just do this dramatic like reading in the style of a fantasy novel. And he just ended up with the show. In season 5, he ends up becoming Dan Harmon's personal assistant. I think he ended up producing. He's on an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the one where they infiltrate a silent disco. Like, he's the one Rosa is kind of like chatting up. And we will see him in an upcoming episode of Community. We'll get there when we get there, but he manages to get a guest starring role on the show he loved. And he's just a hero. And he's kind of the person that Dan Harmon cultivates for all of his toxicity. These are the kind of people, he's like flypaper for these kind of people. And for that, I will personally thank him. I actually went to the New York premiere of the Harmontown documentary. And then there was a subsequent Harmontown recording after, the one with Gilbert Gottfried in New York. I was in that audience, and it was just a great time. I got to meet him. If you scroll way down on my Instagram, you can see a photo of me with him and a Rick and Morty fan photo bombing it in the background. I got to talk to Spencer. Just great people. So I obviously have a soft spot for Harmontown and the Harmontown of it all. But sorry, that was a very me-heavy segment, but I would be remiss if I didn't get through it and just explain the kind of fandom that this kind of creativity cultivates.
He just reminded me Gilbert Gottfried is also in the Aristocrats documentary.
Nice.
Yeah.
He would make a good aristocrat joke formula person, I imagine.
That thing keeps paying dividends, Randy. Nice investment at the beginning of this pod.
I kind of
100%.
rewatch it now. I haven't watched it since like 2005 or 2006.
Tyler, thanks for walking us through that, man. I honestly had the total wrong perception of what Harmontown was. I didn't watch the full documentary. I just watched the 8-minute clip that included that really colorful song. I thought the way you've spoken about Harmontown before, it's always been in conjunction with like something he said on the show as it relates to Community and your experience watching Community. I assumed it was a community, like it was like Harmon talking about community. Like it was like his debrief pod, right? The same way like Lindelof had his pod going on. I thought it was a kind of a companion pod to community. So I'm so intrigued now to go and explore more of this and find chew up some Harmontown. I'm really excited, man.
Yeah, it can be great. I can recommend a few episodes. I love anything with Greg Proops on there because he plays D&D and he's just so fun.
Great.
His character is Tylenol with codeine, a unicorn. It's very fun. But there's also some,
These
like you were
guys really just
truly
keeping it together.
Every time there's a Who's Line guy on Harmontown, it's terrific. For a long stretch there, I would say the best run is Kumail Nanjiani was a regular guest. Just every week, let's bring out
Beautiful.
Kumail. It's a great show. It really, but also there are episodes that are tough to listen to. There's one, it takes place after the very first Communicon in Los Angeles. And like fans had just organized a community convention, but one of them made the mistake of saying like, Harmon should just stop talking on Twitter. And Dan Harmon saw it and like called her on stage and is really like combative with her. It's very uncomfortable. And he's not the good guy in it. And he has some words about season 4 when he finally like watches it that are unkind in an unnecessary way. So that's the thing, is for every episode where he's not talking about community and it's just, I think they're talking about the new RoboCop and it's hilarious, Hollywood Reporter is going to pick up the one where he's like, season 4 sucked or something like that, or here's a Chevy Chase voicemail. So ultimately, Harmontown was a bad thing if you're a community fan. But if you're willing to digest that podcast, it was pretty great sometimes.
I'm suddenly picturing like the Harmontown documentary as a double feature with Tar starring Kate Blanchett.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Well, guys, I also want to thank you for giving me this platform. I dedicated so much of my life, time, and to like this fandom, both Harmontown and community, and having to cover this stuff when it was going on. I was like getting my start in journalism. So really, this has been very, I feel like I was born for this episode, and I appreciate you guys giving me the bully pulpit to just talk about it for a while. This really meant a lot to me.
Great stuff, buddy. Glad you're here with us.
Of course. And now I think enough of me talking. We're going to get into our last segment of this episode. I briefed you guys a little bit on it. But, you know, there was a time where, what were their names again? Yes, Moses Port and David Garcia, I believe. They decided to be the showrunners of Community. They took on this task. Harmon getting fired, the fandom being upset about it, Chevy being a caustic asshole, all of these things. They were like, yeah, we'll showrun that. They worked on one of my favorite shows, a sleeper hit. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Happy Endings, but they worked on Happy Endings. Their big claim to fame was Aliens in America. You know, Joel McHale even went as far as to say they knew they were facing an uphill battle and they took it on anyway. And I just want to say, you know, season 4 of Community, we'll talk about it. We'll criticize it. There's a lot to criticize. These guys don't suck. These guys aren't the villains. You know what I mean? They certainly knew the deck was going to be stacked against them and they took on the hard job anyway. And they did it to keep Community alive. And in fact, when, you know, ultimately, spoiler alert, Harmon gets hired back and therefore they got fired, all they had to say on it was, we're thrilled Community got a season 5. That's all they had to say on it. Class acts. So.
Is that the exact opposite of falling asleep at work?
Truly. I mean, say what you want about season 4. It seems like there were no complaints on set other than the dip in quality and more Chevy. But I can't say if they ever fell asleep. Have either of you ever fallen asleep at work?
No.
I definitely have like fought really hard to not nod off in like safety training meetings or something like that.
Oh, yeah. No, you know, I probably napped in the clothing racks deep in the stock room during a retail shift. I must have disappeared for a bit.
I remember actually around this time when I was working at HuffPost, Ariana Huffington's big claim to fame was like, oh, we have nap rooms. We care about our employees' like work-life balance. It was 2 tiny little closets with a very uncomfortable. It was like when you go to the doctor's office, like that bed was the bed in there. And you know, I would come to find out riddled with bed bugs. So
this is just like the private sector version of education buzzwords.
Yes.
At WeWorks, we have wellness rooms.
Yeah.
Wellness rooms, multiple uses. You can nap in there, sure, but you can pray in there too or meditate. It's a wellness room.
Yeah. And you know what? I loved my time in a WeWork. I worked in a WeWork for like about a year and a half. And like, that's the way to do it. I loved it.
We love WeWork.
Hell yeah. Hey guys, we were. If you want to sponsor us, go ahead.
Please.
That's another funny thing they would do on Harmontown. They would do like anti-sponsorships. So they would be like, we want a sponsorship from Reebok. So we're gonna keep insulting, or we're gonna insult Reebok and praise Nike until Reebok decides to play ball, which I thought was funny. But anyway, I digress. Those guys, those showrunners decided we're going to fight this uphill battle. We don't have the man who has planned this out through meticulous story circles, but here we are, season 4. Let's write some storylines. So I thought a fun exercise to close us out would be, let's play them. Let's talk about some things that if we had this task, if this were our homework, if you will, what pitches would we be bringing to the Community season 4 writer's room? So does anyone want to be brave enough to start? If so, if not, I'm happy to jump in. Now, Randy and I know where it's going, so we're going to have to play a little bit of a metagame with this, but...
So I've got a blend of things on my list. I've got I've got some like serious considerations, questions I have about like actually where our stories are at today and where our characters might be going tomorrow. But then I have like just some silly ideas that I think would be fun for our characters as well.
Hit us with some of your favorites.
Okay. I guess like more seriously in the real like flow of things, anybody graduating in season 4? Are we going to like, how many years are the programs these folks are enrolled in? Like, I think they make the joke in season 3. Usually a community college is 2 years. We're now in year 3. We're heading to year 4. I would like to see that somehow further addressed. I think I need that to be either conflict or comedy, or obviously conflict that leads to comedy. But I don't know if it's a throwaway line, but they have to at least acknowledge it, or it's got to be an outright storyline. Either like we're avoiding it somehow, or we're all finding a way to march towards it together. I don't know. That's one I got.
Excellent. I thought the same thing as well. You do need to graduate these characters. And one of the, like, on a more like micro level, I was thinking too, is as they prepare to graduate, I think it would be fun to see some of their old lives start calling them. Some of their old ways, therefore, might start calling them. And you kind of got to see like, well, Shirley has started her business. Shirley has become an independent woman, but Shirley's not going to be showing up to classes at Greendale every day. So who does she become? And like, then you take that and you put it on Abed and it's like, holy hell, you know?
Yeah, I had an idea that maybe we see Abed get a job this season and have to now like apply his newfound like growth to a new social environment, a structured social environment, like being a part of a, short order cook team at a restaurant.
Yes. Or what would be fun is if he does that and then he start like, in order to win over his new like base of employees, his new study group, if you will, he starts directly quoting lines from like season 1 and people just are not into it. I think that would be very fun.
That's good.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's such... It's kind of funny, Tyler. I looked at this prompt and I was like, when it comes to seasons 4, 5, and 6, I've kind of like forgotten some of like the big picture, like plot trajectory stuff after the air conditioning repair school. Like I certainly remember like some of what's coming. I know what's happening with Pierce eventually.
Yes.
I know some of the new characters that we're going to meet. And I remember some of those storylines and interactions that worked better and worse for me. But yeah, it's this idea that we've got to see them move on, right? So I love everything you're saying. Like I have Annie doing like, maybe a more traditional path. Like a lot of people will start out at a community college to save some money, transfer some credits over. Like, I can see Annie continuing her education while other folks are moving on. These are sort of small scale things. I did have kind of a fun idea. I feel like season 3 heavily implies that Jeff is done. Like he's completed his time. He's got the credits he needs to move on, is the way I feel at the end of that season.
Really?
It seems like it a little. At the very least, if they started season 4 with him saying that, I wouldn't be like, what?
Yeah, like it's not definitive, but I kind of felt like, oh, is he like saying like he kind of wrapped it up? He accomplished what he needed to do and he's ready to go back. But I'm envisioning a world where Jeff, he's lost his in at his former firm, but he's found a foot in the door somewhere. It's less flashy. It's less important. He's, sad to move on from his crew, but like he's also ready to like move on towards this healthier future.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
But then they instantly like put him like as the lawyer on retainer for Greendale because he spent so much time there. And all of a sudden he like answers to the dean. He's got to constantly be in the office. And the dean is like just openly taking advantage of this relationship to constantly consult with Jeff.
I
That's
love this.
brilliant.
I love this because I have a note here where I said that the dean finds himself like either in a relationship or with like a replacement for Jeff, loses interest in Jeff. Jeff is jealous. Jeff finds himself missing the affections of the dean.
That's even better.
So
I love
like
that.
that one can lead to the other, right? After being like overly exposed and like a little abused by him, now all of a sudden he's like, "Where's my pat on the bum? Like, how come there wasn't the, dean?"
And just the idea of him being like on retainer at Greendale too. That means like every bit of dumb from the dean, every bit of national lampoonery that goes on at Greendale is now Jeff's problem professionally.
Yeah,
like I think that's such a good thing for his character. That's brilliant, Randy. I love that.
That's really great.
And I do have one specific episode that I want to see happen, which has actually nothing to do with the big picture. But as we know, Community loves a movie parody. And I was just thinking, I would love for them to just blatantly go for just like a full remake of one of my favorite movies of all time, Wayne's World.
Wow.
Troy and Abed in the morning goes from being an unfilmed joke in the study room, to becoming
like it gets really popular.
Yeah, but it's exploited. Daily reminder: Thursday, purchase feeble public access cable show and exploit it.
Amazing.
Gee, I'd really hate to be those guys. Good old Garth. Yeah, I would just love to see them like really lean into that and just be really on the nose about it. It's perfect.
Your last pitch led into one that I had, which was I thought it would be funny if Jeff maybe like got back to his old law firm and was determined to be a different guy this time and all of those things. Yeah. But then just in celebrating, he gets a little drunk and he starts hanging out with his old friends and he just starts telling them all of the stories about his time at Greendale, thinking like they're all having a good time. They're drinking, they're toasting. What? A paintball fight? Like all of these things. And then the next morning, they've all kind of cataloged it and been like, there is a bevy of lawsuits that we could bring on to Greendale. Like that place is a legal gold mine. We could take it for all it's worth. And then Jeff has to decide, like, do I go with them and burn down the school legally? Or do I fight against all of these high-powered lawyers to save Greendale?
Oh, wow. I love this.
Frankly, I like that better than mine. I think
honestly, I think we could all
makes a little more sense.
I think they all end up working into each other. We have my pitch for an episode and it ends with Jeff being on retainer at Greendale. And then the next episode, Jeff as the lawyer for Greendale has been replaced and is now, there's a new Jeff in town.
Yeah. There's a new student. No, Jeff is no longer a student. There's a new student. That's his the dean's little favorite.
It's true. I've not studied law, but I feel like there's some conflict of interest there for sure.
Yeah, that is
maybe
great.
But what is Greendale if not a place for conflicts of interest?
Ain't that the truth?
For real.
I for some reason wanted, like I noted, I just want like a true another homage of some kind. Give me more genre, like playing in different. I was thinking I would like a true superhero episode, but it's got to be either like a Chevy fever dream, like he is like Gonzo, or it's something to do with like Annie. It's a daydream or something. Maybe it's anesthesia. There's something for Annie, but I want to like maybe live in somebody's brain for an entire episode and get to watch our pals be on like what is ultimately not real, right? Somebody's dream, but we get to watch our guys really have fun in a more extreme sort of superhero environment.
Well, I would love that. Like maybe just an accidental, like someone accidentally like mushrooms the cafeteria.
Nope, that's a separate idea because I want to see Abed and Troy also accidentally trip. It's the next note down.
I love that.
A separate episode.
Great
I do
pitch.
Want those two together to have an accidental drug experience, whether it's mushrooms or acid, but a accidental experience.
Yeah, I love that.
It could be a really potent brownie. I guess we don't have to put them on acid, but I want to see them find themselves confused about the way they're feeling.
That's similar in the vein of drugs, essentially. I feel like the show never does too much with and I understand why, because it's very dark. But the idea that like Annie has been through the program, you know what I mean? Like she was a drug addict and I believe went to NA and all of these things. And I thought it would be very funny if like she has this sort of crisis about not being a student for the first time in her life, and decides to like really go hard on getting like saying Britta is an addict, even though she's like just kind of a pot smoker, and kind of like just really harp on Britta's life and get very obsessively involved in trying to get Britta off drugs or something like that.
Because she's trying to avoid having to focus on her next step. So she's dedicating herself to something else.
Yes.
Right.
I like
As
that.
everyone's kind of gone their separate ways, like we could have like a whole awkward sequence where like they catch Annie like with her rehab support group that she referenced previously. Like we said we were all going to keep in touch, but we didn't. She's reconnected with them. We can like stunt cast the entire rehab team for this brief appearance.
I don't know why my first thought was it's the whole cast of American Pie. I don't know why. It was the first.
That's perfect.
It was the first thing I thought of.
First thought, best thought.
Or actually,
we're not topping that.
Just grab the whole Mad Men cast.
Whoa.
Just
I would like that.
Go meta with this thing. Just like let the worlds collide.
But also just, I like the idea of like, not making fun of it because addiction is real, but the idea of someone like John Hamm being this very disheveled, like recovering drug addict would be like just a not sexy individual would be very funny.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I love that. I do think there is something potent about the idea of like Troy, Abed, and Annie specifically. I remember just having a bit of an identity crisis after I got my first job after college, because it was like, you think about the to-do list we put kids through in this country, and it's like elementary school, then middle school, then high school, then college, and you've done all of that so that you can get a good job. And then once you get a good job, the next thing on your to-do list is die. And I think we really need to start like grappling with that and giving people a little more direction and things like that. And I think seeing the three of them grapple with not being students anymore and having to join the workforce and figure out their identity and their career and all of these things would be very interesting.
Love that. While they're still in school, I think the only thing I wrote down for Britta, I'm sorry, Britta, but maybe it's a function of the writing so far. Britta gets an internship and just becomes more insufferable. Britta becoming more insufferable through perceived legitimacy or perceived expertise was really the only thing I could see her going from here. She's done some school now. She thinks she's grown. We already have the seeds planted of her psychology thing. I see her like very immediately like having an internship. It's not paid, and she's like poo-pooing everybody else, and it makes her very insufferable for a period of time.
I was toying with the idea of also like the flip side of that actually is Britta goes back to her old life as kind of an activist, what have you. But because she's been to Greendale, because she's had all the experiences she's had, suddenly Britta is the season 1 Jeff of her group. Now she has power and influence over people.
Somebody
and we
hire
see
this man.
It's great.
So right for
I would love to see like Jeff have to come in and be like, here's how we deal with power.
Like Shirley could employ Abed.
Well, that would be great.
Yeah.
And she'd kind of have to mom him a little bit too. Like this, Dreamatorium's fun, but the rubber meets the road. We're working 9 to 5.
And that's part of the tension too, because she is holding up the front that she is just doing this as a business person. But it's partly that she wants to mom. Like she doesn't like to be treated like the mom. She doesn't like to be treated as older, but she also needs it.
Yeah. Now she can mother her business.
She has to
can mother her
eventually
employees.
face that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as we know, that story could, the 8th quadrant of the story circle could be very nice because Abed doesn't have a mother figure. That's kind of been a sticking point with him. Yeah. So it might be nice to, even through friction, give Abed a legitimate mother figure.
Yeah, I almost like the idea of like her, to your point, Randy, like babying a little bit, and him like maybe seeking like, no, I want to get better at this.
Yeah.
I want to be like everybody else. Like hold me accountable.
Yeah, and keep that circle moving because he was having to start to reckon with that in season 3 a little bit. And quite frankly, I don't think they've used up all the track on Abed, Troy, and Annie living together. Those were some of my favorite moments of season 3.
So I did write down, and I was pleased when you talked about her kind of like moving on to her next step, Randy. Yeah. I wrote down, is she still living with the boys? Like where's she off to in life? That feels like it's got to be somewhat temporary. She must want it to be temporary. So whether in season 4 we see her actually separate or work towards separation, And maybe there's angst in that too. But yeah, I was like, what's Annie and the Boys is very interesting to me, but I guess I'm curious how it's holding her back.
Yeah. Yeah. The beauty of a fourth season is that, you're right. Everyone does have to start looking at life beyond Greendale. And, not to spoil anything, the show addresses that a bit. But yeah, it's such an interesting time for the show, that I love all of these pitches about are just them getting outside of Greendale. I'm curious, does anyone have, other than your brilliant thing about the idea of Jeff, or about the dean getting a new Jeff, does anyone have anything for like the dean or any of the other people who are going to have to be forced to stay at Greendale?
I was too scared to think about Chang. Honestly.
Same.
I really, I started to go down that rabbit hole and it was too weird.
I do think there could be some comic possibilities if with this restructuring of the air conditioning repair school annex, maybe there's a windfall of new funds available to the dean. And we watch him really do a horrible job managing these new resources.
The dean with a blank check would be a dangerous thing. That's so fun.
Yeah, I love that.
I also think it would be very funny, this idea of how much we've seen the dean fall in love with these people. I think it would be very funny if after they graduate, he is as devoted to just a brand new crop of people. Like we learned that the dean's whole thing is every 4 years, it's on to the next.
On to the next. Yeah, that's good stuff too.
I think it'd be a good one-off joke, but heartbreaking.
Oh my God, no. Nope. The dean, seeking new connection, makes himself a professor. Trying to find a new study group to connect with.
He makes Pierce the dean so that he can get a demotion.
Yeah.
Well, he's still the dean, but he's stepping into the role. I'm also a teacher.
Yeah, but he's trying to do it in a character. He's trying to pretend he's not actually the dean while he's doing it. He's trying to pull a Mrs. Doubtfire is what he's trying to do.
I'll tell you what.
Oh, you just made it better once again.
The dean makes a how to create a cosplay class. I'm taking it.
Yeah.
Listen, we're available. This is a pretty solid writing team right here.
Right.
I'm just saying.
I am looking up. It does appear that they've already written season 4. Okay. So that's a bummer. But otherwise, these are good ideas that we'd be happy to. I'm also an actor, so.
That was good.
Oh, guys, this has been great. Any other pitches for Community season 4 that we want to run through? You guys had some great ones. I threw this last thing together as a way to put a button on this, get everyone talking again, because it was a very me-heavy book report that I appreciate you guys muddling through. But these pitches for season 4 exceeded my expectations. This was so fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Is this what being a TV writer is like? This rule?
No way. I think it's a blast, man. I don't remember everything about season 4, but there are things to look forward to. There's some fun cameos. One of my favorite Britta episodes is in season 4, so I'm looking forward to that one. I'm a Britta stan, as they
absolutely
say. So yeah, we'll have some fun.
We're gonna have some fun, and honestly, it all leads into season 5 is, I think, one of my favorites of the series. I think the first episode of season 5 might be my favorite episode of the series. And you really can't get there without getting through what we're about to get through in season 4. It matters in the longer history of Community, and I'm excited to dive in.
I'm just the most excited to eventually talk about Meow Meow Beans.
Oh man, I'm excited to learn more. The inside jokes that we've built along the way have been such a joy.
Yeah, there was a time where I could say pop, and you had no clue, Kris. Look at the man you've become.
To me, I didn't know why you needed help reacting to something. I didn't get it, but now I do.
And Kris, you've just been such a great sport. It's been nice seeing all of this through your eyes. Before we go, I actually just want to hear from both of you. We got a peek behind the curtain, and the peek wasn't great. The wizard is no longer a big head in the sky. It's a guy pulling levers behind a curtain. What do we think about what we've learned about Community, and what are our thoughts going into season 4?
I think for me, it helps I've perceived that perhaps season 4 isn't the strongest. And so it helps sprinkle a little grain of salt on that, knowing that it wasn't anybody's idea of the best path forward. It was just the necessary path forward, right? I think that will be helpful as I watch the show. I think if I walked into season 4 totally blind to the drama, and I thought it was just the same folks still making the show together, and I noticed a perceivable change, it would probably rock me. And now it won't. Now I'll be like, okay, I just know I got to get through this. Tyler told me I'd get through it, and then season 5 is one of his favorite first episodes. That'll be really helpful. So
good.
Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. And it's interesting about the show leans so meta as it is that to sort of at a certain point require you to learn some behind the scenes information for context going forward it's very community.
Yeah, I think this was helpful for me as I reflect on some of the different departures and returns we'll eventually see moving forward as well. It gives me some extra framing.
I'm just going to try not to be disappointed that we're not getting the Jeff on retainer at Greendale, the Dean having a new Jeff storyline. Damn, that would have been a great one.
Hey, have they written the movie yet?
Now we're talking. Now we can get into this. That's true. Well, you know what? We should just cut this whole segment and we should just pitch all these ideas to Peacock for the movie.
Clip it, send it.
Dan Harmon responded to one of my tweets once. I've got a line to him.
Well, I mean, you guys are friends. I think you need to follow up.
We're basically friends. Yeah. We've got a photo on Instagram together. It's, there's evidence.
So now my trick is I've got to reach out to Spencer and convince him to host one of our gamified drafts on media.slash.lit.
He's the best. He's still doing stuff. Every once in a while I'll be working and he'll just go on Twitch and play Minecraft and I'll just watch and he keeps to himself now. I think he has his own podcast called That Happens, but he's really just fallen into a nice place for himself. Another shout out to his D&D prowess was so good that there was briefly, it was a CISO original, but there was a show called Harmon Quest that everyone should look up where Dan Harmon, Jeff Davis, Dan Harmon's now ex-wife, Erin McGathy, they just play D&D with a special guest every week and they animate it. And it was really good. And it got 2 seasons. So great stuff.
CISO, never heard of it, but I've SEESO for anybody who's curious.
It was NBC's first attempt at making its own streaming service.
I see, okay.
And they wanted to fill it with nothing but indie comedy as opposed to what would eventually become Peacock, where they were you can watch every Real Housewives. And that was a bit more of a selling point. But that was early streaming wars days, man.
Yeah, anywho.
Well, friends, that's all I have. Would either of you like to take us out? Tell the people what they can look forward to, what they can expect from you, please.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thank you, everybody, for listening. So grateful for another, session here in the classroom, especially for such a special assignment. Tyler, you were brilliant tonight, sir. Thank you for all the hard work you put into this.
Thank you.
I have been educated, and it wasn't the teacher. You did the project, and the presentations of the class really hit.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
If folks want to hear more from me, I am obviously the grateful co-host of this Media Lit podcast with Randy Elaine, but I'm also the co-host of Batman by the Numbers over on thepopbreak.com with the illustrious Dan Cohen. We just love going deep on all things Dark Knight. We're in our era this year, going through his cinematic iterations, one era at a time, taking a little pit stop in the months of June and July to do some female superhero talk, getting ready for Supergirl. So a really fun superhero draft in the month of June, talking about all female superheroes and villains. And then we've got a little superhero review coming for you in July. So look out for the Batman by the Numbers podcast on thepopbreak.com. Randy, I'll leave the other one for you, pal. Aside from those, I'll say, other than those things, find me on Instagram at Kris_Ingersoll. Kris spelled like Kringle.
Yeah, as our listeners well know, we love our Pop Break family. Kris also joins me and Justin Mancini on Podalay, a Beck Hansen appreciation podcast. We recently dropped our episode on Wero, and coming up next month, we've got The Information. So we're getting a little bit deeper into the catalog now as Beck takes a step back from the public spotlight. And I'm so excited to hear what my co-hosts think about some of these somewhat lesser known albums that are on the horizon. It's the summer of House of the Dragon, so you can also find me doing weekly write-ups on House of the Dragon Season 3 over at the Pop Break.
Read Randy's writing.
Yes.
You want
it's
to
so
read
good.
Randy's writing.
Thank you.
The guy knows what he's doing.
You're too kind. And I would finally just add, we just recorded our final Pop Break Presents very special episode of 2026. It was a review / preview of 2026 summer movies. We were with Alex Marcus, Pop Break podcasting director. We were with his It's Complicated co-host Manish, and some Pop Break newbies, Matt and Hannah from Horror Hour with the Hannahs. And they were such killer guests. They were awesome. So check out Hot Movie Summer on the Pop Break.
Is that a pun? Killer guests.
That's great stuff.
Yes, indeed.
And I'll wrap up. You can find me on the Pop Break feed of where all their podcasts, all their great podcasts are housed. Once a month, I do a podcast with my wife called Not Couple Goals, where we review romantic and erotic thrillers. We've got a new episode coming out this Saturday, I believe, first week of July. But the last episode we did, we covered Obsession, and like, boy, what a movie! So
such a good episode.
I
thank
felt like
you
I
guys.
watched Obsession because I let you tell it to me. It was
that
awesome.
Movie's a ride. I loved that movie. I love getting to do podcasts. I love getting to talk about movies I love. I love getting to talk about shows I love, and I love the people who give me a platform to do it, and that includes you too. So thank you again for listening to my book report today.
Like, I love the rapport we have, Tyler, but nothing beats the banter between you and Allie.
So good.
I had to pause the podcast because I was laughing so hard, because at one point you're like, sounds like someone's never cooked a cat before.
Dude,
I had to pause it. It was
That's one of my favorite things to do, is to like just be one of my favorite personas is to be the guy who thinks he's got the audience on his side. I think that's so funny. Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, guys, this has been another episode of Remedial Rewatch. Any other things you want to tie up? Give it the old media.lit exit treatment. Pop. Randy, don't give a thumbs up. You have to say it. The defiance, the utter defiance. Everyone be quiet.
What did he say? What were his last words?
He's put so much pressure on it now. All right, you're off the hook. There it is.
There we go.
Hell
Will
yeah.
I edit it out, or will I leave the awkward build up? Only time will tell.
I think you gotta leave it, buddy.
This is Remedial Rewatch after all. We display our scars here, so.
Hell yeah.